Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 84 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is making it happen. Our quote of the day comes to us from Mike Satterfield. Wake up in the morning and make it happen. Bigger and better than the day before. Today's episode is sponsored by The Rocket Entrepreneur. Are you ready for a breakthrough in your business? Learn from myself and 25 other successful influencers and thought leaders sharing how to make 2018 your best year yet. We are going to give you specific advice and strategies to help you break through your plateau and make 2018 your most profitable year ever. This online event is 100% free, and you can watch the interviews on your own time when it fits your schedule. This online event is called The Rocket Entrepreneur. Blast past plateau and make more money than ever in 2018. Please visit the website www.therocketentrepreneur.com. I'm excited to bring you today's episode. Our guest today is a gentleman by the name of Steve Sims. Steve recently wrote a book titled Blue Fishing: The Art of Making Things Happen. In today's episode, Steve definitely delivers, and his transparency is impossible to miss. While most people think about doing things, Steve gets after it and has made a career based upon making things happen for others. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Steve, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the first question I ask everybody, and I'm 99.9% sure the answer is, are you ready to bring it today?
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. So the number one objective of our show is to both motivate and inspire our listeners to never give up. I was curious if you had either a personal story about perseverance or a challenging time that tested you and you kept on going and you didn't quit.
Jeepers, I think my whole life's that. I started off as an East London bricklayer, and now I'm sitting here rolling around with Elton John and the Pope. So I think my entire life is that story.
No, I definitely I knew you'd go through that just because before we went live, I just finished your new book, and I must tell our listeners that it's a great book. It's called Blue Fishing: The Art of Making Things Happen. And one thing I loved about your book, and you touch on it early on, is making things happen. That's kind of the hidden MO of our company. Is it's all about no excuses, no quitting, and making things happen. So I was curious if you have either maybe a favorite story where you had a client that requested something that was really difficult, but at the end of the day, you were able to make it happen.
The first thing, probably a lot of my stuff, ranging from sending people down in the Titanic or taking over museums for a dinner party, most of my stuff probably in the early stages looks either impossible or difficult. I've noticed something in my perception is if I recognize it as impossible or difficult, it becomes harder to get. If I don't see that it's difficult, if I have the ignorance of why can't it happen rather than the 30,000 reasons why it shouldn't, I find that I'm more successful. So a lot of my stuff has been simply going in there with the right mindset to not allow it to be impossible at the beginning.
No, I think it's great that you touch on that, because that's one of the things that we focus on is putting yourself in the right mindset. And I think that doesn't guarantee success, but I firmly believe that if you put yourself in the right frame of mind, it guarantees that you have a better chance of accomplishing whatever that goal or objective is.
100%.
So if you had to describe yourself in one word, what would that word be?
Oh dear, transparent.
I like it. That's the first time that anybody's used that word in that question.
There you go. I think that would be. I like to think you gave me one word, but I like to think of myself as impossible to misunderstand. So trying to abbreviate that to one word, I'm transparent.
If you don't mind expanding on that, because having read your book and done some research, I definitely understand. But if you wouldn't mind just expanding a teeny bit on that for our listeners.
The trouble is I'm a great believer that my stomach is smarter than my head. So when it feels right, that's got to be in the stomach. It may look absolutely sexy as hell. And as entrepreneurs, we got shiny object syndrome. But if it doesn't feel completely right in the stomach, I avoid it. And I've learned to trust that. I find that when I meet somebody whether they want something or offering something, trying to get something from me, as long as I know exactly what their motive is, that's transparency. I can live with that. I can live with a smart person that's not a rocket scientist, but I don't want to live with a smart person that pretends he's a rocket scientist. So I want that transparency. A lot of people call it authenticity. I don't like that word. I like transparency. I want to be able to see, what are you after? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to get out of me, the relationship, the conversation? Then I can understand if my stomach says, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me, and then I'm all for it. So I'm a greater believer in transparency than I am on authenticity.
No, now you said something also in that first part of your answer is the shiny object syndrome. And I think in today's day and age, we all get that in some way, shape, or form, where you're doing something and your phone rings or vibrates, or you hear a ring or hear a noise. And I think it's important to stay authentic to who you are. And I love your definition of transparency, because I think it defines who you are and what you do as a company. So I wanted to ask you, if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about your company, because I think it's really unique and something that probably everybody knows, somebody that's kind of done something in the shape, but you take it to a whole new level.
Well, Forbes called me the real life Wizard of Oz. So what I do is people come to me when they have some kind of dream, ambition, desire, and I amplify it. I see how far it can be. I've had people come to me that have wanted to meet the rock band journey. I stuck them on stage live in concert. They sang 4 tunes, and they are now deemed as the shortest termed lead singer of the rock band. I had a client that wanted to have dinner in an exclusive restaurant in Florence. I took over the Accademia Museum, which houses Michelangelo's David, set up a table of 6 at the feet of David, and had Andrea Bocelli come in, serenade them during dinner. So I'm the guy that you go to when you want the fantastical and amazing to happen. I've sent people down to the Titanic, had them walk the white carpet of Elton John's Oscar party, had them on the back of a 2-seater MotoGP Ducati, had them getting a guitar lesson from Billy Gibbons and a drum lesson by Guns N' Roses. So I'm the guy that makes it happen. If you can dream it or even think about it, we add icing to it. And as long as you can think about it and afford it, we're the ones that make it happen.
No, that's awesome. And you do have a little bit of an accent, so if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners a little bit about before you took this role of your new venture and company.
Oh, I was an East London bricklayer. My father was a construction boy. I left school at the age of 15. I class myself as educated now, but very openly don't think school had anything to do with my education. I left school at 15, started on the building site, and just thought to myself even then, there's got to be something more for me than this. And I just questioned it until I found it.
I love that. You questioned until you found it. Now, this attitude of just making things happen, was that something that you grew up with, or is it something that you've kind of developed over the years?
I think it must have been in there. I think I've refined it, but I do class myself as 1 degree off a blunt instrument. There is nobody on this podcast now listening in that couldn't do exactly what I do, and quite openly, probably better, but I do it. So while everyone's thinking about it, and while everyone's coming up with a million reasons why it can't be done, I try it and I fail, which teaches me how not to do something. And you fail enough times, you have a startling possibility of actually finding the right way to do it. I have that mentality.
No, you definitely have that mentality, and I love the way you talk about that. So here's a little bit of a follow-up question for that: is how do you personally define success to you?
Years ago, I would have defined it by how much money was in my bank account. And I'm very, very lucky that I discovered that success and wealth has nothing to do with your bank account. It has to do with the friends you can rely on, those people that will put a hand down to help you up, those people that will stand by you, those people that love you for you. That's wealth and success. So quite simply, as long as I've got gas in the tank, whiskey in the cupboard, and my family are all safe and fed and warm and protected, I'm incredibly successful.
I love that definition. And I interviewed somebody last week, and they took a little bit of a different spin, but very similar to yours, is that they define success as freedom. And by freedom, they mean being able to spend time with who they want, when they want and how they want. And I think that's such an important perspective. And one of the things we often talk about in a lot of our shows is that success is not and should not be defined as a monetary number, nor should it be something materialistic. And I want to be clear, it's important to have money to put food on the table and a roof over your head and things like that. But true success, I think, also is a never-ending moving target, because you're always trying in some way to become the best or the better version of yourself.
Yep, hell yeah.
So one of the areas we often discuss on our show is personal development. And I was curious if you've read anything recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
To be honest with you, no. I've been so swamped with the launch of my own book and getting ready for the holiday season and getting ready for what comes after it, because the award season suddenly wakes up in January. And so I haven't had the chance to read as much as of a magazine, let alone a book.
All right. Well, I'd like to just again recommend your book, Blue Fishing, to our listeners. And here's a question for you. And I think I've heard the stat of anywhere between 90 and 95% of people say that they have a book inside them, but the actual number of people that go ahead and put it on paper. So if you had to give any advice or recommendations to our listeners as far as for those that are interested in writing a book, what would you tell them?
Get a ghostwriter. Now, here's the strange thing. 2 years ago, if you'd have asked me that question when I got the contract, I'd have told you to screw any ghostwriters, don't touch them with a barge pole, stay well away from them. How can you call it your book if you're not writing it? In fact, to be honest with you, I actually said that out loud to a few people. And I had a ghostwriter that had been appointed to me from the publishing house, and I did not get on with this person. And I was speaking to my agent, and I said to him, I don't like working with a ghostwriter. I feel a fake. And they said, why? And I said, because I need to write the book myself. And they said, no. You haven't got a ghostwriter to write the book. You've got a translator. And I said, what do you mean a translator? He said, everything you know and that you take for granted won't end up in your book, because for you, it's a habit. It's a reaction. It's in you. If you talk to someone that doesn't know you, they're the ones that are going to pull the cherry and the icing out, and they're going to be able to translate all of what you take for granted into a format that people that don't know you can understand easily. The second I started looking at the ghostwriter as a translator, it was a totally different relationship. So get a ghostwriter, because 9 times out of 10, the nuggets that are in your head, you won't put down on paper because you don't recognize them.
I love that you opened up to that, because I know a lot of people that have written books and used a ghostwriter. And to your earlier comment, I think a lot of people confuse the fact of a ghostwriter doing everything, but the reality is a ghostwriter doesn't know your stories. A ghostwriter doesn't know exactly everything that you want to put forth in a book. So I think when you look at it as a partnership and a strategic relationship, I think that takes away and adds to the originality. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And it comes down to somewhat of the concept of just being open to ask people for help in life, and you realizing that other people have different expertise that you or myself might not have, but together there's nothing you can't do.
Exactly. You're saying things a lot better than I am, but yes.
So here's a different question for you. Assuming the 20-year-old version of yourself would have listened, what is the one piece of advice you'd like to give to the 20-year-old version of you?
Don't sweat it. I've lost a ton of money. I've got smacked in the head. I've got ripped off, and everything has taught me to be better. And it's those elements that have 9 times out of 10 given me the greatest education. A lot of people, when they look at, if you could go back in time, what would you do? They don't say, I'd buy Apple at 30 cents a share. They say, I'd tell myself to avoid that girl. I'd tell myself to avoid that business plan. They try to avoid the pain. What we don't realize is that pain is forced education. You're an idiot if you ignore it, but quite simply, everything painful in your life has been a lesson on what not to do. And if you learn from it, those can be your greatest education points. As I said to you earlier, I class myself as an incredibly educated man. That's because I've been forcibly educated by a lot of pain and trauma through my life that makes me smarter every time.
I think my mindset when I was younger, when my parents were telling me to study and work hard, I think I was forcefully educated in some ways as well along the way.
Yes.
You know, it reminds me of an interesting perspective and point, and a quote that I've heard often is that the most successful people in life fail more often than everyone else. And I think it's not about those failures, it's about what you do with them. And you've obviously created an unbelievably successful company, as well as written an awesome, awesome book that, again, I would recommend to our listeners. But it's what you do with those failures and what you do with those challenges and obstacles. And I think the way you approach it either makes or breaks you.
Yeah, 100%. And it's all to do with the perception. It's the exact same. Everything that happens to you has probably happened to somebody else. But it's whether or not you choose to allow it to define you or refine you that makes the big difference.
Now, if you wouldn't mind just expanding a little bit on the define you or refine you concept, because I think it's a great concept.
So I was with Joe Polish at his 25K event in Arizona, Tempe. And someone actually asked me, what did I think of the 25K group? And his group is a group of entrepreneurs, all incredibly successful, all failures. And I actually said to him, I said, this is a phenomenal group of failures, but they just haven't allowed it to define them. They've allowed it to refine them. And that came out because when you fall over, you're given a choice. Do I sit here and cry about it? Do I settle and take the easier option by not trying to do that? Or do I look at what got me on my ass and go, if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't be on my ass. So I'm going to do it again, but I'm going to tweak that a little bit. And that's the refinement. It's those tweaking moments. You only get a smack in the head when your guard comes down. There is nothing that helps a boxer get better at boxing than learning to keep his guard up. And he only ever learns it when one comes through.
No, that is very true. And I think, not that I'm a boxer myself, but definitely a boxing fan, is I think you definitely learn very quickly that you don't like getting hit nearly as much as you like doing the hitting. And I think that's why Mike Tyson was incredibly successful early on in his career, because he just realized that he loved pummeling people. And it wasn't until later on in his career where people actually connected with him, where I think he had a little bit of a different turn. And I think he probably would prefer his earlier half of his career than the later half.
Oh, absolutely. I remember one of the I've become educated on quotes. I have 1,000,001 boring quotes, but they help teach me. It's like kids. You know, you ask kids to study a math book, they can't do it. But if you ask them to sing 20 adverts, they can sing them all. If we taught things in an advert format, our kids would probably be smarter. But I've got educated on quotes, and I remembered one of Tyson's. Everyone's got a plan until they get smacked in the face.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that quote. Anthony Iannarino, who's a very successful author and a sales expert, I asked him what his favorite quote was early on in one of our first episodes, and he said, I'd like to quote the famous philosopher, and he left out the person's name, and he said that quote, and I said, you know, I'm not sure if Mike Tyson has ever been defined as a famous philosopher, but it's so true. Is everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, and then your plan changes.
No, exactly. It's a weird one, but you can grab the most insightful information and quotes and education from some of the most amazing corners that you didn't think of.
No, I agree. And so here's another question for you: is in addition to that quote, do you have another favorite quote you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, it's my dad. And it's a weird one because he's not known for being the sharpest tool in the shed. And we were walking down the road one day and he wasn't even looking at me. And he puts his hand on my shoulder, which again, still no eye contact. So I look up at him. He's smoking his cigarette, walking forward. We hadn't spoken for 5 minutes. And he said to me, son, no one ever drowned by falling in the water. They drowned by staying there. And then he took his hand off my shoulder and carried on walking. We had no conversation. We had no eye contact. And I remember at the ripe old age of like 16 years old going, the f*** was that? You know, just completely floored as to what was that supposed to mean? You know, but he just dropped this pearl of wisdom that didn't come back to me until my late 20s when I realized, you know, the fight's not over when you go down. It's when you stop getting up. And there's loads of similar but same position quotes out there. And it taught me very well that when you go down, you have two choices: to stay there and die or get up and grow.
I love it. Your dad might have been a philosopher himself.
Who knows? He was, there you go, the most a philosopher from a bricklayer of London. That's the man.
Mike Tyson and your father, two great philosophers.
I'll tell him that.
So, if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Dr. Zeus.
Why?
Because that's just the creativity. Again, I love people that are laughed at because it's always stupid until it's genius. And if you look at people like Elon Musk, Dr. Zeus, Einstein, these people were ridiculed, laughed at, scoffed at. I remember, you don't have to go far back now to look at how many times NASA scoffed at Elon. Now who is Elon's biggest client? And Dr. Zeus was just this creative genius that just puts things in a format that everyone can get. I remember Jay Abraham giving me, instead of a business card, giving me one of Dr. Zeus's books. And I think it was called Oh, the Places We Will Go, or Oh, the Places We Will See. And he said, every entrepreneur needs to start that collection by reading this book. And Jay's brilliant. You know, I love Jay. And I remember looking at him thinking, that's probably the daftest thing I've heard. But it's Jay. I'll put up with it. I'll look at this book. I couldn't stop reading that book. So I would love to go back to Dr. Zeus and just ask him, what happened that made you want to do this? And why did you keep going even when there were those that were laughing at you? And let's be honest, the books are still going on forever, and they'll still go on because they're timeless.
Oh, I can agree and attest to that. I think I've read those books probably a couple hundred times to my 3 young kids in the last 2 or 3 years. So they definitely are timeless. And it would be a great dinner just to ask him what was going on in his mind. And I think he would be such a fascinating dinner to have a conversation with him.
Yeah, exactly.
So before we let you go, Steve, I wanted to ask if you have any parting words you'd like to share with our listeners.
I am stunned that when people come to me, and I want everyone to know by now, I'm just the man that does, okay? I do things. I fall over and I continue to do things. But the simple fact is, everyone out there is probably 10 times smarter than me. I am always stunned at how many people come to me and they go, oh, I'd like to do this, but I can't because of this, because of that. They spend 10, 15 minutes telling me all the reasons that they can't do something rather than the one that they should. What a waste of energy. They need to redirect that energy and focus and develop that one reason that they can or that they should so that becomes a deciding factor and not excuse it to death.
No, I love that. And one of the things we talk about is paralysis by analysis.
Overanalyze.
And like you said, I couldn't, you couldn't. And one thing so many people have said to me over the last few months is, oh, you know, I've wanted to do my own podcast and I've wanted to do this, but I can't. And my response to them always is, yes, you can. And I can help tell you about some of the equipment you might need. And what I always tell people is, I'll tell you the things I wish I knew before it. But I'm so glad that you said it because so many people, I think, focus on the excuses and what I call excuse-itis as opposed to taking that one or two reasons why they really, really want to do something, and then you just don't take no for an answer.
Yeah, no, again, I said it and you made it sound better.
Well, it's always easier to be a Monday morning quarterback than it is during the game. So in addition to the book, which I will have in our show notes as well, as I wanted to ask, what's the best way for our listeners to follow you or connect with you, or what's your preferred way of contact?
Oh, well, it's more like your preferred way. I'm at stevedsims.com, which is the website. I'm also on Facebook under Steve D. Sims. That's one M in Sims. I'm on Twitter. I'm Steve D. Sims 1. But pretty much if you look up Steve D. Sims, you'll find me on all the Instagram, Facebooks, all that kind of stuff. And you can sign up for the newsletter, and it also shows you where to get the book on that website as well.
Well, listen, Steve, I truly appreciate your time. Again, I would recommend to our listeners to getting your book. I've enjoyed our conversation, and the one thing that I do love about you and what you stand for is you just go out and you make it happen. You don't make excuses.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for recognizing that.
Thank you for listening to episode number 84. Steve Sims is quite an individual, and I hope you appreciated both his candor as well as his zest for life. Steve has built his career on making things happen. And when most people make excuses why it might not work, Steve goes all in with both his effort and his attitude. I love how he mentioned that failures can either define you or refine you. I challenge our listeners today, don't fear failure. Don't look or expect failure, but if and when you do experience failure, learn from it. Allow it to refine you, make you better, and prepare you for your next success. Go attack today and go for your greatness.
And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.